Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 26th, 2023. A live show today. Time for another one. And, boy, I don't know. I kind of wish it wasn't. I'm a little wiped out here. Yeah, I've made my transition, of course, back from vacation. But I'm still in that weird stage where I'm not quite back entirely and still missing it and still, stumbling through the morning routine saying, what do I do in the morning actually? Oh yeah, right. There's a radio show. I got to get ready for that. Okay. Well, that counts as getting ready. That was my meditation on getting ready for today's show. Greg Dworkin joins us with the more, let's say, rounded out, complete, and maybe even researched version of what we could be talking about today. Lots happening. It's Wednesday, so we're already in backlog. We've had 2 shows, and I've already, buried a couple of stories in pocket that we, may or may not get to. But we'll turn around and head back after Greg does his roundup of stories. Something interesting that I saw today. Actually, I didn't even know this was happening. There's a lot of things that I have not noticed in the last couple of days, and I attribute some of it to having been on vacation. One is the sudden explosion of stories about, about interest in, frustration with, apparently, the government in terms of its slow disclosure on that very important topic, UFOs. Like, I had some recollection that during the Trump years, he was appealing to his various, his varied fan base of weirdos by saying, well, I'll open up all of the government secrets that they've been holding back from you on aliens and UFOs. Which, it's not hard to believe that there's some information about, I don't know what, that they haven't shared with people in general because they can't verify anything of it. Here's a report from an Air Force guy that saw something he couldn't explain, and we can't explain it either, and so what's the point in releasing it? That kind of information. I don't know that I don't believe that there's alien life or anything, and it's not the sort of thing I spend a great deal of time on. I mean, it does seem like it would be sort of ridiculous to believe that there's literally nothing else alive out there on an intelligent level in the universe. So, whatever. But at the same time, it's just not that important, I don't think, in daily life, unless you have absolute proof that we're being visited, on a regular basis by aliens that could affect the path of how things go on Earth. And it would be a good time for it, by the way, if any of them had, like Earth air conditioning or something like that. That would be a welcome addition to the technology we've employed so far on this planet anyway. But I don't know, it looks like in the last week or so that there's been a number of stories, or they're trying to push a bunch of stories on me, I guess, through the various algorithms that determine what I get to see in my various feeds. Like there's some real, burgeoning interest in, we got to get to the bottom of this UFO thing, and I don't know. Is it just because I'm skeptical about its importance that I've been skipping it, or is it just new, or I don't know what. They're trying to distract from the Trump story. Maybe something like that. The other one that I saw today that doesn't seem monumentally important, but breaks through nonetheless, is because of Tommy Tuberville's continuing blockade of all of the various military advancements that require Senate approval, and I think they're up to like 600 now, or anticipating being up to 600 by the end of the summer or something like that. The Washington Post can explain it all, but the explainer that I saw is just sort of contained within this rather different piece from their fact checker, Glenn Kessler, who for some reason was prompted to look into Tommy Tuberville's tales about his father in World War II, because apparently those tales have some false elements. And it's weird, and it's an interesting thing how he's hedging in this story so as not to go too far overboard. But apparently, the bottom line of it is that Tuberville has been telling campaign trail stories about his father's exploits in World War II combat, which he no doubt participated in. But apparently the stories have been, we'll say, embellished a little bit over time, as frequently happens. I'm not trying to defend Tuberville here. He's a jackass and everybody should hate him. But it's interesting. Glenn Kessler declares outright up at the top of the piece, like, oh, well, we're not calling his patriotism into question or his service. And because of the nature of things and because of the fact that apparently the vast majority of World War II service records were destroyed in a fire in 1973. Wow. What a loss that must have been. He wasn't going to be issuing Pinocchios. So, that was like his big way of being fair. I'm not going to put out my terrible Pinocchio. Anyway, it seems that the story has been misinterpreted, embellished over the years, but the basics of it are, a common story. My dad, why he was so patriotic. We're so patriotic in his family that when World War II started, he was only 16 years old. He lied about his age to enlist in the military to serve his country. It's a frequent tale. People tell that one all the time. It must have happened at some point. But just by way of example, as it turns out, they have Tuberville's father's draft card, which of course means he was drafted and didn't volunteer for the military, which is, again, also no big deal. No one should have been looking to get themselves immediately involved in combat. There were certain people who were so motivated at the beginning of the war, but totally understandable why, as an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old, you wouldn't throw yourself into the meat grinder immediately. But anyway, as it turns out, yes, drafted, not enlisted, 18, not 16, so why the story, you might ask. Then some disputes about the nature of his rank and service. It's an interesting story, just, to get to the bottom of the things and to come to understand that maybe Tuberville doesn't have his head screwed on quite right when it comes to anything, much less military matters. Also, the matter of the number of decorations his father was claimed to have won. He said he had won 5 Bronze Stars, which would be a remarkable total, as I understand it. Apparently, the most decorated soldier of World War II himself won 5 stars, 2 silver and 3 bronze, and not... in other words, no, that didn't happen. There weren't 5 Bronze Stars for Valor awarded. And as it turns out, that was a misreading of the service record. This is not something I'm an expert in by any means, but I'll take Kessler's word for it. The service records showed that Tuberville's father had been awarded 5 Bronze Service Stars, but that's not the same thing as the Medal for Valor, the Bronze Star. These are sort of emblems that indicate that you participated in a combat action in a certain theater, and everybody who participated in that theater would have gotten the same. I don't know what. It's not quite. Well, I guess it's an award, but it's not a medal like the Bronze Star Medal for Valor actually is. So I suppose, it was something that I didn't know anything about until this morning, so maybe they misread it. But anyway, it's sort of an interesting thing. Not something I want to occupy the rest of our time with, because Greg Dworkin is here and he has a collection of stories beyond the UFOs and that Tommy Tuberville is a jerk, which I think we all knew. So good morning, Greg. How are you doing today?
Good morning. We'll talk a little bit about Tuberville because
Sure.
He is a jerk.
He's doing a real bad thing, but he's
it-
also doing some fake bad things.
Yeah,
as it turns out.
obviously all of these stories, Tuberville and Hunter Biden and
Yes.
the UFOs, these are all a distraction from the Kennedy assassination that they don't want to talk about.
The one that's coming up.
No, the one back in
The
63.
super secret. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. I deep
They
stated
won't
out
release
there
what
for a
really
second.
happened, and so they want to distract you, so they point to the shiny object, which is UFOs. Of course, they don't want to
Well,
tell
they
you
are
what happened
shiny.
there, so they point to some other thing. The thing about Tuberville, again, you have to put this all in context. Whether it's Elizabeth Warren talking about
yes.
Native
Good
Americans,
point.
part of her heritage, or whether you go back in your own history. I think about my dad who served in World War II, who absolutely positively never talked about it, didn't want to talk about it, said it was horrible. He was on a ship somewhere in the Pacific. That I know. He was in the Navy. That I know. Details? I don't know. And so the stories you get from the family may or may not match what reporters dig up when they actually look.
Yeah.
And who cares?
It happens a lot. It's of interest now because of his blockade on other military
he's a
promotions.
jerk. I mean, so if Glenn Kessler wants to say, I have standards for telling people that somebody lied, which I used on Democrats, but I don't want to use it on Republicans.
Yes.
Fine. We already know that.
That is an interesting thing. He tries to explain away why he's not doing it, but I mean, the bottom line.
Don't write the damn article if that's what you're going to do.
I guess so.
Your job is to
that's a good point.
Apportion Pinocchios. And if you don't want to do that because you looked into it and you found out you can't do it, that's like a prosecutor checking something out and deciding not to prosecute.
Yeah.
You don't have to. Nobody made you write that story.
That is true. Well, that's a good point. He's got his answer
story,
ready.
And you shouldn't have written it. And as you did write it, all you do is highlight the fact that you are easy on Republicans all the time. It's your MO. We all know that. But I don't know why you wanted to publish it.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. All right. Well, good. I'm glad I shared it. Now I have something new to think about this stupid article.
Well, that's my job. Make you think about new things.
All right.
So, as we all await the Trump indictment, which didn't come yesterday, maybe will come tomorrow, the thing that I want to highlight today is not the rise, but the fall and the further fall of Ron DeSantis, because I just think it's a lovely topic to explore.
Sure. That's really happening, at least.
It is. And so those of us who said he was the Scott Walker of Florida feel just a little bit vindicated by events. And events they are. Listen to this. We already went over the fact that he's like crashing in the polling. But Politico has a story. DeSantis lets go more than a third of campaign staff as reset continues. The cuts, which were confirmed by advisors, will amount to a total of 38 jobs shed across an array of departments.
Let's go.
So while he was at a super-duper expensive donor retreat, his campaign manager, Janera Peck, acknowledged that the campaign had overspent in some areas and that further adjustments would need to be made. A little bit more on that. But before we get to it, let me just give you a quick lightning round of stuff we may or may not get to, just to catch everybody up in the news, including you, who's halfway stuck and still in vacation. I know how that happens when you come back.
Yes.
Okay, this is from The Morning, which is a little newsletter that the New York Times puts together, and just in bullet form. A federal judge struck down the Biden administration's asylum policy, siding with immigration advocates who said its strict limits are illegal. Mm-hmm. If you're allowed to apply for asylum, you can't tell people how. You just can't. Okay. So you can't say if you wait online, that's good, but if you don't wait online, that's bad. You just can't. You can't deny people because they didn't follow your procedures. They're allowed to apply, and how are they supposed to know? They're not Americans. They just get here. Under pressure from far-right Republicans, Speaker Kevin McCarthy suggested the House was moving toward an impeachment inquiry against President Biden. And it is absolutely positively under pressure from far-right Republicans like Netanyahu in Israel. McCarthy is completely enslaved, and I use that word advisedly in a political sense, since Ron DeSantis throws it around all the time.
I mean, maybe there's some benefit to it.
Exactly. So there should be some benefit. You can get personal benefit from being enslaved, and McCarthy is the one to talk about it.
Right.
So why is he doing it? Because he's being pushed to. And he claims that, look, an inquiry is simply that. It doesn't mean we're going to impeach.
Right.
It's just a way of appeasing the nutcases. And we know the nutcases aren't going to be appeased and they're going to want more. So what he's doing is stupid, but he's a weak little man, and so he can't help himself. The Education Department opened a civil rights investigation into legacy admissions at Harvard.
Well,
that's one of the things that came out of the Supreme Court decision.
Yeah.
We talked about the fact that Ron DeSantis is cutting his presidential campaign, more on that. And Republicans asked the judge in the Hunter Biden case to throw out his deal, as if Republicans can interfere with the court system.
Hello, this is a Republican. Will you please do this? That's what they did? They asked a judge?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, no. Thank you.
They said it was politically tainted, so you shouldn't be getting him off easy on misdemeanor tax charges.
Yes.
That nobody usually gets brought up for prosecution anyway.
Hello, I'm a Republican.
This
is tainted politically.
Glenn
I'd like to taint it more. Yeah.
Prosecutors have discretion.
Yes, though they tend to have a bit more than he does.
Right. UPS reached a deal with unionized workers, likely averting a strike next week. I mentioned this because there were all these doom and gloom. Oh, Biden and the economy, Biden and the economy. But what if there's a strike? And what if it affects everybody? And what if it's really bad? And like none of this stuff happens because like pundits can't help themselves. Jeff Stein over at the Washington Post has a better view. He says a lot of economic things are breaking Biden's way of late. Inflation cooling, labor market stays hot, recession calls downgraded, investment in IRA and chips is booming, especially in places like Ohio. Today's big deal on the UPS to avert a summer strike. So a lot of things are going Biden's way and consumer confidence is rising, and that's all good. So we don't want to ignore any of that stuff as we delve into the other stuff. Also, while Trump hasn't yet been indicted, but he's about to be, 8 search warrants issued in Trump classified documents case, it turns out, not just Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
But there was 7 additional ones. Now, they may be for individual devices. One for your phone and, one for your computer and one for Mar-a-Lago, all at Mar-a-Lago. So it doesn't mean that 7 additional places have been searched, but maybe they have because it's all under seal. So for all of you saying, well, why not Bedminster? Well, how do you know it's not Bedminster?
We don't yet. Yeah, that's still protected, and it would have made great sense to have.
We only know what Trump complained about.
Right, and he may have been asleep when they searched something else, so he wasn't aware he had to complain about it.
And we don't know who else is a target besides Trump in the January 6th thing, but we do know John Eastman wrote a letter to Jack Smith.
Target. Yeah.
Saying, here's why you shouldn't indict me.
Well,
it was like totally spontaneous.
He had time on his hands.
He had time on his hands, and he has a hobby, and he just decided, his hobby is writing various special prosecutors about why they shouldn't indict him.
Right.
He's been doing this for years, so don't make too much of it. You can't assume anything just because he does that.
I don't want to be indicted by any one of them.
Right. So all of that's happening. I just didn't want to miss that, and then, of course, what's happening in Israel, which is absolutely awful. The right-wing coalition has pushed Netanyahu the way that the right wing in our Congress pushes McCarthy. And you can look to Israel as a sign of how that could go badly for McCarthy when you lose control over what's going on.
Yeah,
now, Netanyahu says, I haven't lost control, which of course he has. So, the Olmert, the previous PM, said basically this is civil war. Let's not mince words. You're essentially saying that the right wing coalition in power is trying to codify the fact that the ultra orthodox don't go in the army, don't pay certain taxes,
right?
And the non-ultra orthodox are not happy about it, but they don't have the majority in the Knesset, which is the parliament there in the Congress in Israel. And when you don't have the majority, you can't stop stuff. So even a 5-seat majority in the House for Republicans can be powerful when you vote along party lines because it's simply a simple majority. This is an object lesson to all American voters as to why every single election is important, and you don't boycott them because you have some odd idea that, well, he doesn't deserve my vote. If you don't vote, this is what you get. The other side is going to come out and vote. And so if you think that you have some principled reason for not voting for the side you usually vote for, you're letting the other side in. When the other side gets in, they are going to do this.
Yes. Well,
and
that's a good point.
Don't let that happen.
All right. I refuse. I'm not going to let it happen.
Israel's complicated. There's a lot of things going on. This is all wrapped into Israel's identity, about what's happening with the settlers, whether or not there's a foundational right of Israeli Jews to basically run the country at the expense of non-Jews. And this has its seeds back early when Israel was founded. The Ashkenazi Jews tended to be relatively heavy-handed, shall we say, with non-European Jews while they were running it. And now the non-European Jews have the majority in the country, and they're not happy about it, and basically ignore anything that the Ashkenazi Jews say. And that's part of why we got here. But it's, again, if you're going to say, well, my grudges from 50 years ago are going to run how I do things now, this is what you get.
Okay.
Don't let that happen.
At least we're aware of what we're going to get.
Right? 1860, 1863, that period, war's over. You lost. Get over it.
Yeah, we haven't been able to convince everyone of this, but okay. They've put up statues, they get very excited about it.
Well, as Faulkner said, past is never forgotten. It's never even past. So, these things happen, and this is all wrapped into everything. But again, Israel's an object lesson of how things can go bad really, really quickly. So is it existential in this country that you vote and that you put Democrats and keep Democrats in power? The House is threatening to impeach Joe Biden simply out of spite, out of retribution for impeaching Donald Trump. Did Trump deserve it? Yes. Does Biden deserve it? No. But that doesn't matter to them. No.
Neither does it matter, of course, that the press, it doesn't even matter to them that they decided that it was absolutely the worst thing possible to even hint that you might be impeaching a president as tit for tat for another one's impeachment from the other party. And they were certain that that was a super strong reason not to say, look into possibly impeaching George W. Bush. But they seem to have forgotten that. And it was interesting
on Morning Joe today, and I only caught a tiny snippet of it. But as I turned it on, Mike Barnacle was plaintively asking one of the reporters, and I was listening to sound, not sight, so I don't know who he was talking to.
All right.
Barnacle plaintively asked the reporter, so let me ask you a question, he said.
Please.
With this Republican Party, with McCarthy and with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Gosard and the Freedom Caucus and stuff, how do you, as a reporter, even cover this party? Mm-hmm. And the reporter's answer is, well, it's hard.
Oh.
Which is incredibly unsatisfying because parts of them are traitors. Parts of them are liars.
Well, that is hard.
Parts of them are radicals. And you can't say that because I don't know why.
Yeah.
But, it's like Glenn Kessler not saying Republicans lie when they do.
Yeah.
Well, there's a limit, because in politics you're supposed to be able to lie within certain parameters that we, the press, decide are acceptable. He's a liar. McCarthy's a liar.
Yeah.
And we know he's a liar because we know what he said right after January 6th, and we know how he's been lying about January 6th, thanks to the January 6th Commission that he tried to stop being formed in the first place.
Yes.
So that's all going to culminate in Jack Smith's talking indictment whenever that comes. And it's going to put Republicans in a difficult spot. And it's especially going to put Republicans in moderate districts that Biden carried in a difficult spot. And I hope they lose, and they deserve to.
Yes. Well, I'm in agreement with that. Certainly.
So, that's how you cover it.
Yes.
That's not hard.
Right. I agree. This is not a difficult decision, certainly. Speaking of, did we? I think we did mention Giuliani.
I didn't even get to Giuliani.
Or haven't, or was it the fact that you mentioned, what was it? I can't even recall what it was,
Eastman.
but there was something in the last say. Oh, well, whatever it is, we can get to Giuliani too, because, he too, I think it had something to do with, admissions of, I can't remember what the tip-off was. I don't know that we
really learned a whole lot. Bernie Kerik, who works with Giuliani and is, as we say, a close aide, which is a fancy way of saying also a convicted felon. And Giuliani had lots of emails back and forth about fraud, voter fraud, because Giuliani was tasked and therefore tasked Kerik to go find out whether it's true. And there were lots of emails back and forth between them that have now been revealed, but the January 6th committee already told us that there was nothing there, in the sense that Kerik said, well, we looked and we didn't find anything. So Jack Smith is using all of this, presumably, to point out that Trump knew that he lost, and there was no plausible defense he could have to say, well, I thought I won, and therefore what I was doing wasn't really criminal because I wasn't deliberately trying to, overthrow the government.
Oh, I see.
I was merely trying to establish the fact that I have a right to ask whether or not fraud was committed. That's all. That's what those electors stuff was. That's what all of this was. So you can't pin it on me, copper.
Yeah. Oh, I think maybe the trigger of thinking of Giuliani was your mentioning of, politicians, they lie about things, and, you maybe need to be sort of allowed to lie about things from time to time because that's the nature of the business, but still it should be called out, and why some reporters would call it out with some people but not with others. But yeah, maybe that's what triggered my memory of it because, I guess, that's the news of the morning from the Giuliani camp is that he's, had to make some stipulations in one of the court cases against him that yes,
yeah, well, he admitted
did, in fact, lie
he lied about Shay Moss and his
Yes.
and Ruby, I forget
Freeman.
her last name, Shay Moss's
Freeman.
mom.
Yeah,
The hardworking poll workers in Georgia,
yeah,
who were accused of slipping drugs to each other while they were manipulating the vote. Giuliani came up with that story. It's bogus,
yeah. Lots of
and he
drugs.
has to admit in court that I lied about them.
Yes, and he's now claiming that, I was lying about them, but in a First Amendment protected kind of a way, which I'm not certain what sort
It's
of
gonna
protection
fly.
it has. So, okay.
Yeah.
What a day. And, I'm still waiting for the
So all that
indictments to
stuff is
come.
happening, and I haven't even gotten to Ron DeSantis, which we'll do after the break.
Right. Yes, I remember him. He was sinking like a stone, as I recall you had said. All right.
Well, he'll sink further by the time we get to the end of the break.
Right. Well, that's the way stones
Probably more bad things will happen to him.
sink, I suppose, as long as
Like
there's
the
still
car
room.
crash yesterday that he was in that didn't injure anybody.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. But, okay. Well,
Well,
we'll find out about it.
Florida Board of Education determined that being in a car crash is good for you and it helps you learn
Right,
things.
sometimes it's beneficial.
You can learn skills that will help you in later life.
Right. How to be in a car crash. That's not really a skill. I think anybody could probably do it. But
Well,
anyway.
they said it about slavery. They could say it about car
Right. If you can do that, I guess you can get away with almost anything. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right. Well, we're back now with a little bit of chatter over, but some interesting chatter. We're getting ready for our next segment here on Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. Where it's me, it's Greg Dworkin, and another story we're preparing for from another weirdo jerk, as I understand it. But
I knew the break was coming,
We were gonna
so I
get
tried to censor my language a
yeah,
little bit.
well, right. it was still friendly, and that would have been an editing nightmare to say, oh, I've got music bed underlying and something to bleep. That would have been tough, but good save there.
Anyway,
Yes.
So that's part and parcel what we'll get to in the Ron DeSantis story. So
That was the
DeSantis is
story.
dropping in the polls. We know that.
Good, yes.
He's letting his
Fine.
people go. Let my people go. Okay, he said.
We're back
It's
to
biblical. So, he just let his people go. He lets a third of his campaign staff go.
Yeah.
And the quote from Ben Jacobs, reporter, is great, where he says, one GOP operative snipes to me, Ben Jacobs, DeSantis fired 40-plus people because he and the First Lady refused to fly Delta or American to Des Moines and Manchester.
Why does he
wants
hate
to do private
America?
planes.
Yeah.
And what Semaphore did
interesting. Good call.
is Dave Weigel and Shelby Talcott have a whole story about DeSantis firing a staffer who shared video with fascist imagery. Son and Brad, we covered this the other day. But turns out that the staffer's name, Nate Hockman, is one of the people who was let go. Prominent young Ron DeSantis staffer, used to work at National Review, rising star.
She was.
Videos drew special attention after a New York Times story over the weekend reported that a strange meme-filled anti-LGBT video shared by the campaign was made by a DeSantis staffer and passed off to a different Twitter account. We call that sock puppeting.
Yeah.
Noting style similarities between that and video shared on the DeSantis Cam's account, Republican strategist Luke Thompson speculated they may have been the same people. Turns out it was, and that's one of the people that was fired.
Well, all right. Good fire.
Now, the view from David and Shelby, the Hockman hire was big news on the online right. Hockman had been published by the New York Times, discussed conservative populism on the left wing, Know Your Enemy, and written for National Review. His fast riser and some enmities. Last summer, The Dispatch, which is Jonah Goldberg's center-right place, published audio from Twitter Spaces chat where Hockman, while criticizing the white nationalist influencer Nick Fuentes, said the future Trump dinner guest had gotten a lot of kids based with his approach to politics.
So he's a Nazi.
Yeah.
All right. And good job hiring him too, Jonah.
Right. Some influential conservatives defended Hockman, who's Jewish, before the campaign began. Hockman was making a case for DeSantis that donors agreed with, but Hockman's background also shaped some of the more recent discussion among political insiders about DeSantis as his presidential run struggled and donors worried the campaign was too online. Look, 25-year-old staffers can be incredibly valuable to congressmen.
Yes.
But they shouldn't be running a national campaign for president. You need somebody with a little bit more experience, somebody who's a little more seasoned.
Yeah. Doesn't surprise me, though, for DeSantis for a number of reasons, not the least of which. What was the name of that weirdo spokeswoman that he had for the long time? Christina
Pushaw.
Yeah. He was so into the way she worked that it doesn't surprise me that he would build his campaign the same way.
Right. Now, I think I saw this maybe in Punch Bowl. Maybe it was in Politico Playbook.
One of the
let's see. I have to think. It was in Political Playbook. Bowl. So that's good because it's available to you and your viewers and listeners. Punch Bowl is prescription only. And they're talking about Team DeSantis' identity crisis. And basically, they set up a super PAC that in theory can't coordinate with the campaign.
Yes,
so they have to communicate
a campaign that's hard to coordinate
memos and stuff they say in public, but they can't sit down and work out issues.
They have to sock puppet it.
So the DeSantis campaign is spending all sorts of money and has to fire staff because they're not getting a lot of money. All the donors are maxed out. Everybody hates him. Nobody wants to give to him.
Yay.
And the super PAC can raise oodles of money because the limits are totally different if there are limits at all.
Right. And
so a super PAC has money. Now DeSantis doesn't. Question on the table, who's running the campaign?
Nobody was running it before.
Super PAC thinks they are.
Yeah, they're the only ones with money, so maybe they are.
And we're buying ads, and we're running the show, and we're deciding what ads and what the themes are and stuff like that. And Ron DeSantis' campaign now has no money, says, no, we're running the show, we're the candidate. How do you think this is going to end?
Probably with more Nazi videos.
Not well. Badly.
Yeah. I mean,
right? I mean, this is part of what I mean, sinking like a stone. So Playbook there's this Team DeSantis' identity crisis, and they go on about the interplay and the infighting between these two groups. But you can't run an effective campaign if the
not normally.
If the guy running the campaign isn't the candidate.
Yeah, I mean, you would think so, but the only thing I can say about it possibly working out in any way, shape, or form, I can't see how you win this way, but it's a non-traditional time. But Ron DeSantis is, an empty vessel, right? So you just program him with whatever he was programming himself, what his wife was programming, and Christina Pushaw was programming, and this other new Nazi.
Use
Wasn't working.
terms like reboot and programming with that robot.
Well, see, it fits, and
it does fit.
So, but you could
well.
program him as anything. So, all right, the things he was planning to program himself with aren't working. Perhaps another completely different person that has nothing whatsoever to do with him and won't coordinate with him can program him better. It's possible.
I would expect that
the
Super PAC, in fact, would run a much better campaign than DeSantis is running.
They've got more money, so maybe.
They also have more political experience.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way.
It usually doesn't. And it would be incredibly difficult to do when you're 30 points behind as well.
If Trump were the candidate.
Yes.
And the Super PAC were Paul Manafort and or somebody with experience running the thing, first of all, they cheat and coordinate.
Sure.
Secondly, Trump would get mad because the other guy's getting all the headlines and fire him immediately.
Yes, if that happens.
That's normally what happens. Mm-hmm. Trump is not unique in that regard at all. And the fact that this won't and can't happen is because DeSantis really, really, really doesn't know what he's doing. He's a terrible candidate.
Yeah.
That's why we've been referring to him as the Scott Walker of Florida. Mm-hmm. He's just not good at this.
Yeah. So I don't see how it, it doesn't look like something that's going to work out real well. But when your campaign is horrible and garbage to begin with, I suppose, it's not his plan, but it would be an interesting experiment to see whether a super PAC with more money than the campaign actually has can just take over. And that can only happen when the campaign's been failing all on its own the whole time. And somebody says, well, it can't get any worse letting us run things. Plus, you can't tell us not to run things. So, yeah, well, it would make for an interesting model if there were a better candidate attached to it. But
anyway, so that's what's happening to his
necessary
campaign. But wait, it gets worse for him.
Oh, good. He stepped in a pit full of alligators.
Monmouth University has a poll yesterday. Trump maintains strong GOP primary advantage despite indictments, but that's the subheading.
Oh.
The heading? Yeah. DeSantis message falls flat.
Really? Okay. I mean, it has. It just seems like the Trump thing would be. All right.
According to the Monmouth poll, University poll, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' efforts to paint himself as both a stronger candidate and a more effective leader than Trump have largely failed to connect with the GOP electorate. How can it when, you're trailing in South Carolina?
Yeah, that's not going to help you.
You're in third, right? How can you make the case that you're the strongest person to oppose him? That's just a meme killer.
Yeah. So I guess you try to do a meme-filled video to try to convince people you're stronger. Look, here's me shooting laser beams out of my eyes.
So from the poll, when asked whom they would like to see as the Republican nominee for president in 2024, 46% of GOP-aligned and leaning voters named Trump, 20% named DeSantis. Without any prompting in a primary ballot question that explicitly lists the 14 people, Trump's support increases to 54. Oh, yeah, that guy. And DeSantis's vote barely moves, with no other candidate getting above 5. In a head-to-head contest, Trump gets 55 and DeSantis gets 35.
Okay.
So these results are similar to a Monmouth poll taken 2 months ago when DeSantis launched the campaign. In other words, the campaign launch, as horrible as it was, remember, that was the one that was launched on Twitter. The guy's just bad.
Yeah. There's not even any Twitter anymore.
Really hasn't made any headway whatsoever. So he blew through all this money by flying jets to fancy places, and he's gotten nowhere in the polls. And so Patrick Murray, the director of Monmouth, says DeSantis has made no headway. There are arguments he'd be a stronger candidate and more effective president, both falling flat. 22% of Republican voters say DeSantis would be a stronger candidate. Twice as many, 47%, say he would actually be weaker than Trump. On the question of governing, only 19% feel DeSantis would be more effective.
Okay.
And when considering the entire GOP field, nearly half, 45% of Republican voters, including those who lean toward the GOP, say Trump's definitely the strongest candidate to beat Biden. Another 24% think he's probably the strongest, and just a third think that any other Republican could do it. So Trump will be the nominee. This is why.
Yeah.
And the poll also tested head-to-head contests between Trump and 2 other candidates. Against Scott, Trump gets 72, Scott gets 23. Against Christie, Trump gets 82, and Christie gets 12. I'm telling you, people hate Christie.
Yeah, well, that's all right with me.
I love it, and I hope Christie keeps telling the truth, and it's a twofer. I hope people hate him, and I hope he keeps telling the truth.
So far, it's working out great.
It's working out great for me, so I hope he keeps doing it.
No, me. Yeah. Well, both of us. Yeah, it's fun to watch Chris Christie.
Yeah, he's good at what he does. Keep doing it.
Yeah, and he's not dumb. He knows what he's in there for, and I don't think he thinks that the end game is winning the nomination. So as long as he's happy telling the truth about Trump, let him do it. I don't know where the money comes from, but
right. This poll didn't ask anything at all about Democrats or Biden versus Trump, so it's just about the Republican electorate. And again, the Republican electorate is a fascinating group of people because they're not monolithic.
True.
Not all of them are stupid.
Not in the same way. That's true. Not in any monolith. They have very varied kinds of stupid. And then some of them, I guess, somewhere.
It's just interesting to see why they decide what they decide. Now, when you just flat out decide that I don't want to be bothered by facts,
am I supposed to do that?
It's very difficult to have a discussion with them. So the fact that Bidenomics is working, the fact that the economy is getting better, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear about Hunter Biden.
Mm-hmm. And that
but there's nothing there.
Fact.
But I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
I want to hear about impeaching Joe Biden.
Oh.
But there's no reason to. Well, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear that you did. And so when you go back with all of that to Kevin McCarthy, that's why he's stuck.
Yeah, I guess so. So, yeah, I guess that's his way of dealing with it, is to say, well, we'll look at an impeachment inquiry. And by the way, there's a different procedural stance for asking for impeachment inquiries than asking for impeachments, too. You deal with them differently on the floor. So that'll be fun as well. Yeah, and at the same time, McCarthy claims it just gives him different tools. So, a reminder during the impeachment inquiry for Trump basically ignored everything. He said executive privilege, kiss off. Right.
So how McCarthy is going to try to make the case that elevating it to an impeachment inquiry somehow gives the House tools that they don't have now, and somehow that'll be more effective than what they've already done, is a hard sell, given that we just saw one and was just reminded that, there's no jail cell in the basement of the House that you can put people in when they don't comply with your subpoenas.
Yeah.
This is Marshall of the Supreme Court stuff.
But they're gimmitarian, so they can come up with anything.
Now, there's a columnist, not just Glenn Kessler is not the only columnist for the Washington Post.
That's true.
There's a columnist named Gary Abernathy. They hired him because he's a Midwesterner, and his job is to translate to East Coasters why the Midwest likes Republicans and likes Trump. And he's been doing this for a while. He's not as bad as Mark Thiessen. He's not as bad as Hugh Hewitt. But sometimes you look at that and say, I don't understand how you could possibly still support Trump after all of this. It's not clear he still does. He's evolved. And let me give you an example of the evolution and how things are going for the Biden-Harris ticket. He's got a column today entitled, Why Are Republicans So Afraid of Confronting America's Racial Past? In targeting how public schools teach about race, some Republican lawmakers seem determined to downplay or ignore the tribulation suffered by Black Americans throughout our nation's history. Why? Is it because they fear that by acquiring such information, the next generation of white Americans might gain a fuller understanding of why racial equality is yet to be achieved, as well as why remedies are needed? As a conservative on most issues, I seldom agree with much of what Vice President Harris says.
Yeah, but it sounds like he is.
This is as remarkable as Mike Pence saying it. This guy's basically a Pence Republican. Huh. But when she traveled to Florida last week to criticize the state's new education guidelines on race, I found myself nodding along.
Well, all right.
Let's not be seduced into believing that somehow we will be better if we forget. She said, we'll be better if we remember. We'll be stronger if we remember.
Yeah, weren't there whole protests about taking down statues that we can't erase and forget?
In response to his critics, he writes, Ron DeSantis tweeted, Democrats like Kamala Harris have to lie about Florida's educational standards to cover for their agenda of indoctrinating students and pushing sexual topics onto children. If Harris was lying, Gary Abernathy writes, DeSantis avoided detailing how. Particularly outrageous within the Florida curriculum are standards that suggest there was some benefit to slavery. Yes, guidelines include instruction on how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, which is why the Florida Board of Education is likely working on standards about car crashes. Yeah. DeSantis, got in a car crash. He runs that state, and so they're going to explain to you how car crashes are good for you, and they develop skills, which in some instances could be applied to their personal benefit. So I thought the absurd, Gary Abernathy writes, slavery was actually good for them. Chestnut had been abandoned long ago. Apparently not.
Yeah.
And I was taught this in high school. My history teacher, my AP history teacher, was from the South and taught the class that slaves were the most pampered people in the world.
Of course.
Because they were so valuable, slave owners could not afford to have them sick or miss a day of work or whatever. I was taught this.
Yeah, I mean, that does have a Jim Crow era ring to it, and okay. I mean, it's wrong, but we know that.
And he was people a teacher with a PhD after his name. You couldn't question him.
No, of course
I know, because we tried.
Yeah,
pretty contentious. So, and that was back in the late 70s, early 70s, late 60s. I'm bewildered about why some on the right think too much knowledge is a dangerous thing, a fear demonstrated not only by restricting teaching about race, but through challenging or outright banning books in school and public libraries. Yes. While it's including many literary classics, while it's true the left too often wants to turn schools into laboratories for progressive ideology, expanding thoughts and ideas is always preferable to restricting them. Rather than banning reading material advocated by the left, the right should insist on adding books promoting conservative viewpoints. And if that means building a bigger library, everybody wins.
All right.
What Republicans seem to fear is that if public schools fully teach the horrors of slavery, the inequities of Jim Crow, and the effects that linger today through disparities in economic and political clout, then 21st century white Americans might somehow feel culpable, as the Miami Herald reported in his coverage of Harris's visit. And this is amazing because not only is he a Mike Pence Republican, but the press never covers Harris. He's covering Harris more than the press is covering her.
Yes. Well, he is.
At DeSantis' behest, the legislators prohibited instruction that could make students feel responsibility or guilt about the past. But the facts are sufficient to assuage guilt. While a minority of white people in the United States were enslavers, a much larger number were on the side that ensured the end of the terrible practice. That is to say, the North.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Right. Way back when I was in public school, I recall learning that the Civil War was fought over slavery, but not much else. Maybe if kids like me in white rural schools had learned more about the day-to-day horrors of human enslavement, there might be more widespread empathy. So I just think it's an amazing article.
Yeah,
given
right.
who he is and what he's writing about. And my point here is, first of all, he's right. And secondly, Kamala Harris is being heard.
That's good.
Press may not cover her, but she is being heard.
Well, all right. I'm for that. This is kind of remarkable. I didn't really expect that. I thought, given his mission, we were going to hear something completely different. But, well, all right. It's nice to find out that there are, in fact, a few people around who still call themselves conservatives.
Yeah, and he didn't do
that's actually
a Ross Douthat or a David Brooks thing. He didn't write that whole column and then in the last line say, to be sure, all of this is true, but I'd still vote for Trump.
Yeah. That's missing from that. Maybe he edited that out. I don't know. He may still, but that's good. That's interesting. And I've been wondering whether certainly there are certain people out there who will, who would admit, slavery really not great. You remember how
slavery is bad, period, full stop. If you have any other approach to it, no.
I know. It does amaze me every once in a while when conservatives pull out stories like, way back in the day, the Democrats were the party on the wrong side. They were pro-slavery. That was the Southern
and as
party.
Bad as slavery was here, it was even worse in other places. Stop doing the what about stuff.
Yeah, that you don't need to do. But certainly I found it all so interesting that they love to talk about the fact that there's been a political realignment without acknowledging there's a realignment, and at the same time say I'm a proud Republican. But the party was founded as as an abolitionist movement. Yeah. Why did you move away from that? Don't you see?
Sides.
Yes, and they'll say as much for whatever reason when it comes to the Democrats, or they won't admit that the things changed for the Democrats, but they'll say, well, we were the party of Lincoln, and okay, so why aren't you helpful now? Well, something, Robert Byrd was in the Klan.
I mean, this is like the Yankees and Red Sox traded their entire rosters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now, who are you going to root for?
That's a good.
And then the Red
question.
Sox, at least they were the Red Sox a few minutes ago. Now they're all Yankees. Mm-hmm. Say, look at us. We won all these championships.
Yeah. Yeah. Right?
No, that's not really how it works. I get that you just switch sides. But no, you don't get to claim that. It's not you.
No. All right. Interesting. Well, that's a good find. I might have been tempted to skip his column entirely if I knew who he was.
Yeah, I like to skim his columns to see what nonsense he's saying, and I was struck by it. Now, that is followed up, and our whole discussion is followed up by a Greg Sargent piece.
Aha.
Striking new data about young voters should alarm Trump and the GOP. And that gets at to why Chris Rufo and Loudoun County
I know them.
Busybodies want to get into the library and stop people from reading books.
Yes. In the Loudoun County case, it's because they work in Washington, D.C., and they happen to live in Loudoun County, but they are national Republican operatives, and then they pretend they're just concerned parents when they're here.
Striking new data about young voters should alarm Trump and the GOP. Something's happening among young voters, even if, to paraphrase Bob Dylan, we don't know what it is.
Oh.
Consider, youth turnout exploded during the 2018 midterm elections. In 2020, energized opposition to Trump among young voters was critical to his defeat. In 2022, surging youth participation helped fend off the widely predicted red wave. Even some Republicans fear that expanding youth populations in swing states pose a long-term threat to the GOP. And now, new data supplied to me by the Harvard Youth Poll, that's John Delavolpe's place, sheds light on the powerful undercurrents driving these developments. Young voters have shifted in a markedly progressive direction on multiple issues that are deeply important to them: climate change, gun violence, economic inequality, LGBTQ rights. Right? And guess which party's on which side. Delavolpe, director of the poll, refers to these issues as the Big Four. They all speak to the sense of precarity that young voters feel about their physical safety, their economic future, their basic rights, and the ecological stability of the planet. This generation has never felt secure. And here's a chart showing how opinion among 18 to 29-year-olds has shifted on those issues, and it's amazing.
There's a book in this. This is the Children of Security Moms Not Feeling Secure, everybody.
Right. On the many big issues, 18 to 29-year-olds are getting more progressive. For example, same-sex relationships, for example. Yeah. Support in 2010 was less than 40%. Now it's well over 50%.
In the same age cohort?
Yeah.
Okay, so different people, but when they were
different
that
people,
age.
But the same age cohort. Right. So you age out of the cohort, new people come in.
Yeah. I like
and it really accelerated once Trump was inaugurated. But also for strict gun laws, for action on climate.
Yes.
And the idea that food and shelter are a right. These all suggest that today's young voters have been substantially more aggressive on these issues than young voters were even 5 to 10 years ago. These voters, in fact, are voting.
Good
so
news.
Don't go there. Well, they don't vote. Yeah, they do.
All right.
By 2036, Gen Z will represent 35% of all eligible voters. They're going to shun the Republican Party.
Good. They should.
So the data clearly shows a Zoomer Trump effect. Delavolpe told me every single variable has gotten more progressive. Republicans should take a step back and listen to what this generation is telling them. Well, they don't want to. So their approach to it is, okay, well, you can't read about anything important because we don't want you to, do anything other than what your elders tell you.
Yes.
And I think that the obvious solution for the GOP is just raise the voting age to 65.
That's a possibility.
at least for a few years.
They can try it. It's probably they could still get it on
It's
the ballot
something
in
they would do.
Ohio. Sure.
It's absolutely in line with their whole approach to this sort of stuff.
And why not, right? Yeah, really, life doesn't begin until retirement.
That's what I suppose.
It used to be conception, now it's retirement.
Yeah.
It's a small shift. What's this dip in interest in action on climate in this chart? You'd think that would be skyrocketing, but for some reason there's a small dip in it. Maybe they just have other things like first we have to get rid of the fascists, and then, I don't know. Even though I think you could probably walk and chew gum at the same time. But that's an interesting finding. It's just a, 5% dip in it from 2020. Which is unexpected. I don't know. Maybe there's doomers. Oh, well, too late. Let's do something else instead. I hope that's not the case. But all right. Anyway, that's a fascinating article. And it's interesting to think about, so what were 18 to 29-year-olds thinking years ago? Doesn't matter now. They're all 40s and 50s. All right. So, yeah, we just have to see the continuation, the uptick in participation and voting rates by these more progressive 18 to 29-year-olds. And looks like they're getting used to it as a matter of course, something they know they have to do. That's good news.
Yep. Anyway, there's a roundup. Ran out of time.
All right, that's
We'll talk
true.
about more tomorrow. Maybe, I don't think he'll be indicted today, but you never know. I'm thinking it's a Tuesday,
we'll
Thursday
talk about
thing.
it tomorrow. Oh, you think so? All right. Well,
I don't know. It just seems to be Tuesday, Thursdays.
Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right. Well, it could be tomorrow then. But if not, then we'll wait until next week.
We'll wait until
I'll give
Friday.
them
Well,
instructions.
look, whatever it is, we're going to wait until it happens, but it's going to happen soon.
Well, let's speculate now. It's going to happen, and then they're going to. I don't know. I don't have much to add to that. Okay. Well, we'll have to wait and see, I guess, what happens. But I'm excited to do. So.
It'll happen, and then Kevin McCarthy will say, "See, we have to impeach Biden."
Right. Yes, absolutely. Plus, we have to have movie night. I understand he's very excited about hosting a movie night to show that Congress is coming together and working together across the aisle by coming and watching a right-wing lunatic movie.
Right.
So
Joe Biden presides over a rising economy, dark Brandon rising, while Ron DeSantis falls. And, he signed legislation to make a national monument to Emmett Till and his mom.
Ah, all right. Well,
So,
that's
he's a good
about
president.
diversity
You should
and
vote for him,
equality. Yeah, I think so. He may
he's old.
even
So what?
be old, but yet
Mick Jagger's old.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's all made up for by his being voted for by youthful voters. It all comes out in the wash, I suppose. All right. Well, thanks, Greg. We'll check in tomorrow in case somebody's been indicted, and if not, we'll just root for it tomorrow instead. I can accept that. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. All right. Where shall we start on our second hour? I have, 2, 3, 5 articles to share with you, and I'm not certain which one to begin with, but all on, I've mentioned again, and it keeps coming up, the Ohio ballot initiative and what's going on in the special election being held against all rules and against all odds in August, next month, coming up very soon. Yeah, I guess this is the last week of July. I don't really know what time it is or what day it is or anything like that, but I'm referring to the calendars. They tell me it's almost August. So Scott sent me one from the AP just the other day, which I think is helpful and explanatory. And I have this other one that I found this morning from the Christian Science Monitor, which I haven't used in a long, long time. But they had a really interesting approach, not only to the story, but to story reporting in general, which I thought was of some interest. And, I'm thinking I'd like to start with theirs just because of the way they presented their material, which I thought was interesting. And by which I mean this. All right. So when you open it up right away, it's, the headline is, in Ohio, abortion battle triggers fight over direct democracy. And that's exactly what's going on here. And I thought, okay, they've hit the nail on the head. I think Scott's AP article, in case we don't get to it, but you want to read it for yourself, we can certainly include it in the roundup. But that one titled, Abortion Messaging Royals Debate Over Ohio Ballot Initiative. Backers said it wasn't about that. That takes a very different angle, at least in the headline there. So maybe we do end up reading both. But I thought I wanted to start with the Christian Science Monitor one. One, because we almost never use their material. But two, just an interesting way, as I said, that they present it. So you open it up. There it is. They've got a photo illustrating the piece. And then right above the byline, which, by the way, goes to Simon Montlake for Christian Science Monitor, there is like a toggle switch. And you can select whether you want the quick read or the deep read. And in the deep read, it tells you, I think it's set for the deep read. It doesn't tell you how quick the quick read is, but the deep read it says 7 minutes. That means like 75, 80 minutes for us, I think, to read through. But it's interesting just that they offer you this, well, you know what, I'll take the quick read on this. And I'm almost tempted to flip the switch on the quick read, read it, and then say, okay, you know what? You can, because it's so short that, so here we'll just demonstrate what they're talking about and what it means to flip the switch on the Christian Science Monitor between quick read and deep read. Simon Montlake, by the way, they use, Christian Science Monitor, one of those papers that still uses a sort of pen and ink rendering of the headshots for their writers as opposed to photos. And, some interesting lighting must have been going on in the photo that they used for the pen and ink rendering of Simon Montlake. He has like a 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 o'clock shadow going on. and it's interesting. I think maybe the lighting had something to do with it. But more interesting is the quick read, which is just 4 paragraphs long. So we'll run through it and then expand things. Across Ohio, activists are urging voters to turn out in a special election next month to decide what the Columbus Dispatch calls, quote, one of the most significant questions in generations. The quote ends after questions there for some reason. The measure, called Issue 1, and it's the only issue on the ballot, by the way, would make it harder for voters to amend the state constitution. You remember this? Behind the battle over direct democracy is one issue, abortion. Following the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade last year, abortion policy has become a state-by-state matter, and both sides are increasingly focusing on state constitutions. Last year, voters in Kentucky and Kansas, rather surprisingly, I would say, rejected amendments to their constitutions that would have stated that there was no right to an abortion. In Michigan and California, voters approved making abortion an explicit constitutional right. Ohio is looming as the next high-profile test. An amendment on November's ballot would guarantee a right to abortion in the state constitution. August's special election is widely seen as an attempt to make it harder for that amendment to pass. This is primarily about abortion, says former Governor Ted Strickland, a Democrat. They know if the people of Ohio have a chance to vote on this under current rules, it will pass. So they want to change the rules. That's the quick read, and that is pretty quick. By the way, also in the middle of this, both the middle of this and the in-depth read or the deep read, I don't know whether the description changes in the deep read, but there is another interesting feature for the Christian Science Monitor. There's a big yellow box, like highlighted, that is a little darker yellow than that, but it's unmistakable and it stands out. A block that says why we wrote this. An explanation of why they thought this was an important enough story to write and publish, which would be an interesting exercise to put Glenn Kessler through in his piece about Tommy Tuberville, as Greg points out. So why did they write this? I mean, I'm just curious about, I don't know that it's such a great explanation. I'm just curious about the use of this box. With abortion policy now up to states, activists are looking to state constitutions as a way to guarantee or deny rights. And that's leading to battles over how easily constitutions can be amended. That is interesting. And that too is a quick read. Now the deep read on this thing. By the way, the why we wrote this doesn't change at all. But here's the in-depth version of the story, and it starts out with anecdotes. Beverly Johnson votes without fail in every local, state, and federal election. But she didn't know much about Ohio's upcoming special election until last week when, ready for this one, singer-songwriter John Legend showed up at her house. I was on the porch when he came up, said Ms. Johnson, a home daycare provider. I just stood there with my mouth open. And as amazing as it might have been, I hope it was happening on a weekend because there were kids that needed your attention in the home daycare. But I'm sure that they were well cared for in your brief distraction in talking to John Legend. I think you can be forgiven for that one. Mr. Legend that's some name, isn't it? Was in the majority black Cincinnati neighborhood, encouraging residents to turn out and vote against the sole item on the August 8th ballot, a Republican written proposal known as Issue 1, which would make it harder to amend Ohio's Constitution. And if you remember our discussion of this from weeks back, you'll recall that it was previously the rule passed by Republicans that there would be no more, and there could be no more August special elections because turnout was too low in them and it was a big waste of everybody's time. And then they realized, we could really use a low turnout election for something like this. Let's write ourselves a new exception that says, okay, this is one more August special election. We change the rule to allow this defiance of the rule just this one time, unless we need more later, in which case we'll do it again. So that's an extra layer of, how far out of their way, how far back, how far over they are bending backwards in order to get this done. Okay, back to the story. Across the state, activists have been deploying celebrities and urging voters to turn out for what the Columbus Dispatch calls one of the most significant questions Ohio voters will be asked in generations. If it passes, Issue 1 would raise the threshold for approving constitutional amendments to 60%, up from a simple majority. It would also make it harder for citizens to put such measures on the ballot in the first place. Right? Why are they doing it? Again, it's because in November, abortion rights advocates plan to do just that, to put that on the ballot and say, let's change the Constitution to enshrine a right to abortion here in Ohio. And they're very worried that a majority might actually approve of such a change. So quick, before November arrives, let's have a special election to change the threshold necessary in order to adopt a new constitutional amendment. It's pretty foul, really, honestly. Anyway, driving this battle over direct democracy is one issue in particular. You know it from the short read: abortion. Following the U.S. Supreme Court's ending of 50 years of federal protection under Roe v. Wade, abortion policy has become a state-by-state matter, and supporters of abortion rights have been increasingly turning to language in state constitutions to try to preserve access, even in deep red states, like, as you learned before, last year, voters in Kentucky and Kansas rejected proposed amendments to their constitutions, which would have stated that there was no right to an abortion, which in Kansas effectively upheld a court ruling blocking an abortion ban. In blue states like Michigan and California, voters approved making abortion an explicit constitutional right. This flurry of abortion-related ballot measures, which could be repeated next year, was also seen as helping to boost Democratic turnout in what had been forecast to be a punishing midterm cycle for President Joe Biden's party. So it's sort of taking on the role that at one point some advocates attempted to cast marijuana legalization ballot initiatives in that light. It gets people interested. They come out to vote for that, and while they're there, they vote for, typically, Democrats. Although increasingly Republicans are campaigning on the same thing anyway. They're just weird and different. It's not all bad that they're for that, but all the rest of the stuff that they're for, well, that's crap. We don't like that. Anyway, now abortion, a much more powerful motivator by far than the marijuana legalization efforts once were. Anyway, Ohio is looming as the next high-profile test. A one-time swing state that now leans Republican. Abortion is currently legal in Ohio up to 22 weeks of pregnancy. That's the way they put it. In 2019, Republican lawmakers passed a measure in anticipation of the end of Roe v. Wade that would ban abortion after 6 weeks, with limited exceptions. But after Roe was overturned, a state court put that measure on hold. The state Supreme Court is set to rule on an appeal at some point, I guess in the near future. Now, Ohio voters are getting ready to decide on a November ballot measure that would explicitly guarantee a right to abortion in the state constitution. Republicans have made clear that August's special election is an attempt to make it harder for that November amendment, which a recent poll found had 58% support, to pass. And imagine winning an election by 58% and being told, actually, you lost. It's like, it's like a Senate filibuster. Anyway, this is 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution, Secretary of State Frank LaRose told a local GOP dinner in May. Now remember, waiting in the wings is Scott's submission of the AP article where Republicans say, no, that's not what we were doing. That had nothing to do with it whatsoever. So that's going to be an interesting juxtaposition. Mr. LaRose, who is Ohio's top elections official, is seeking the Republican nomination to challenge Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown in 2024, by the way. Mike Gonidakis, do I have that name right? The president of Ohio Right to Life and a prominent campaigner for Issue 1 says that while stopping abortions was his primary motivation, conservatives might have other reasons to want to curb citizen-initiated amendments. That is to say, they've already used it for what they want, and they want to pull up the ladder behind them and burn it. These include business owners worried about labor-backed minimum wage initiatives and gun owners wary of firearm-related amendments. This is not just about abortion. There are 100 reasons to vote yes on Issue 1, he says. No, there aren't. Don't do it. Mr. Gonidakis says that the state constitution shouldn't be a policy document. If the legislature wants to pass a law, they can do that. We can hold them accountable at the ballot box. It's interesting how much the Freedom and Liberty Party is against freedom and liberty. It's weird the way they don't trust we the people anymore. Oh, that's crazy. Opponents of Issue 1 say the legislature has become less responsive to the will of the voters due to selectively drawn districts, where primaries often serve as the only competitive elections. Gerrymandering, of course. If Issue 1 passes, they say, it would further entrench the power of Ohio's GOP-run legislature and stifle popular reforms, including how those same lawmakers carve out their districts and those used for the U.S. Congress. Republicans, remember, last year overrode a ballot-initiated reform of redistricting, effectively converting the state's Republican tilt into a legislative supermajority. Good governance organizations say restrictions on constitutional amendments would stymie future efforts to tackle gerrymandering in Ohio. Remember, they got a clear directive from the people on gerrymandering and just chose to ignore it. Not only did they choose to ignore it, but they chose to fly in its face by saying, we'll turn Republican-leaning Ohio into a gerrymandered, solid, super Republican supermajority. Now, next up, the question of whether or not will be a low turnout election. It's got a question mark here. Both sides share one challenge, turning out voters in August. Only 8% of people in Ohio, eligible voters, cast a vote last August when parties held primaries for state legislative seats. Indeed, GOP lawmakers voted last year to scrap most special elections in August, calling them a waste of money. But now they have decided this one is awesome. Mr. LaRose, the Secretary of State in 2021, described low turnout elections as bad news for the civic health of our state, only to reverse that stance in support of Issue 1. Apathy in summer elections is real, says Bob Clegg, a Republican consultant in Ohio. Normal people don't know about it. All they worry about is getting kids ready for school and finishing up a vacation. They're not focused on a special election, he says, which is where celebrities like Mr. Legend come into the picture. As the Springfield native told a small crowd gathered outside a polling center last week. He had a day off from his taping schedule in Los Angeles for the upcoming season of The Voice. So what better way to spend it than canvassing for votes in Ohio with TV crews in tow? I could have relaxed at home, but I couldn't chill on this Tuesday afternoon. We've got important work we've got to do in Cincinnati, he said. In an interview after a lunch at a Baptist church, he described his role as raising public awareness of an election whose backers may have hoped it would go largely unnoticed. I figure my job is to help bring attention to what's happening, he says. Encourage people to vote, but also just make sure they know that this is happening. Ohio is one of 18 states that allow citizen-initiated constitutional amendments. Successful initiatives are relatively rare. Since 1913, only 71 such amendments have qualified for the Ohio ballot, according to the Dayton Daily News. Of these, 19 have been approved. 11 passed by margins of 60% or more. Ohio's legislature can also put constitutional amendments on the ballot, which it did with Issue 1. So in other words, we can put issues on the ballot. We can even call for special elections, even though we banned them in most cases. You can't do that. You, the people, i.e. we, the people, the bosses who hired supposedly, and, in the Republican rhetoric, they actually say this sort of stuff. The people who are supposed to be in charge, who can hold the legislature accountable, but I guess apparently they can't, at least not in this instance. I think most Ohioans are proud of the fact that we're one of the states that have this initiative possibility, said Ted Strickland, who served as Ohio's governor from 2007 to 2011. This has not been abused. It's not resulted in our Constitution being loaded with a lot of inappropriate policy matters. Mr. Strickland, a Democrat, is among 4 former Ohio governors, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, who have publicly opposed Issue 1. And as have 5 former attorneys general from both parties. He calls it an outrageous power grab by lawmakers. I think he's right about that. Anybody with their eyes open understands that this is primarily about abortion. They know if the people of Ohio have a chance to vote on this issue under current rules, it will pass, so they want to change the rules. Republicans have tried similar blocking tactics in other states that allow citizen-initiated constitutional amendments, so far to no avail. Voters in South Dakota and Arkansas rejected proposals last year to raise their thresholds for amendments to 60%. In Missouri, a proposal to raise it to 57% failed to pass in this year's legislative session. But Missouri, of course, famous for ignoring the outcomes of statewide initiatives. Early polls suggest that the Ohio effort may also fail. A poll conducted in July found that 57% of likely voters opposed Issue 1. Only 26% voiced support for the measure. The rest were undecided. Among Republicans, 4 in 10 said they were opposed. Next up, support for abortion access. Should Issue 1 fail, November's constitutional amendment seems likely to succeed. A USA Today Suffolk University poll this month found that 58% of Ohio voters favored creating a guaranteed right to abortion, including a third of Republicans and 85% of independent women. A Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, you remember them, their poll in December found that 66% of Ohio residents wanted abortion to be legal in most or all cases, the same proportion as in neighboring Michigan, which had voted the previous month to enshrine a right to an abortion in its constitution. But should Issue 1 pass, it would not only potentially impact November's abortion measure, but also make it significantly harder to initiate future constitutional amendments. Groups currently need to gather signatures from 44 or more of Ohio's 88 counties to qualify for the ballot. Issue 1 would require signatures from every county and eliminate a 10-day extension for finding additional signatures if any are ruled invalid. Yeah, I can see how that would make things more difficult. What is already an arduous process would become an almost impossible one for groups without deep pockets, says Jonathan Entin, a professor emeritus of law at Case Western Reserve University. It's basically only special interests that will have a reasonable chance of getting an amendment on the ballot, he says. Your average neighborhood groups are going to have a lot harder time. And that could affect citizens on both sides of the ideological spectrum. For the past 2 years, Diana Smith, a certified nursing assistant, has been gathering signatures for a constitutional amendment in Ohio to limit vaccine mandates and outlaw discrimination against those who are unvaccinated. Her campaign is all volunteers, she said, and can't afford to pay canvassers to collect signatures, so it's been slow going. Also, it's unpopular and stupid, so maybe that has affected things. As a Republican, she's unsure how to vote in next month's special election, though she sees a higher threshold for constitutional amendments as fair. I think 60% is okay, because if it's a good initiative, it should be able to pass by 60%, she says. But the new rules on qualifying for the ballot strike her as undemocratic. That part she doesn't like, of course, which makes her likely to vote no on August 8th. It's already a hard process for Ohio citizens. I think it takes power away from we the people, which a 60% initiative threshold also does, by the way. But, of course, she won't be able to see that for some strange reason. All right, that brings us to the end of this one. Now I kind of do want to jump back over to take a look at the AP article, because this one covers the claims that, oh, no, look away, it's not about abortion, it's about some other sort of thing. This is the AP article, Abortion Messaging Royals Debate Over Ohio Ballot Initiative. Backers said it wasn't about that. We'll see what they think it was about. Julie Carr-Smith and Allie Swenson, unless she's Smythe, I don't know, S-M-Y-T-H, how she goes on that one. But at any rate, this piece, again, from the AP, the fraught politics of abortion have helped turn an August ballot question in Ohio that would make it harder to change the state constitution into a cauldron of misinformation and fear-mongering. How do you like that? State issue 1, the sole question on the ballot, calls for raising the threshold, you know all about that, from simple majority to 60%. Starting next year, it would also double the number of counties where signatures must be gathered, right? And do away with that 10-day grace period, just as discussed in the Christian Science Monitor piece, the long version. How'd you like the difference, by the way? You did get the gist of things from that short, quick read, but you missed a lot by not doing the deep read. That is an interesting switch. Anyway, Republican state lawmakers and the GOP elections chief urgently advanced the proposal as an abortion rights question was working its way toward the ballot this fall. So, nothing to do with it? We'll see. However, they insisted it had nothing to do with thwarting that measure. They were just going to hold a single-issue special election in August for no particular reason. Okay, sure. But early summer messaging on social media and in churches has consistently urged a yes vote on the August amendment, quote, to protect life. And that's just one example of the loaded messages confronting voters during the campaign. Now, how does raising the threshold to 60% protect life? Well, it doesn't unless it's about abortion. So come on. Protect Women Ohio, the campaign against the fall abortion issue, is airing pro-issue 1 ads suggesting that abortion rights proponents at work in the state, quote, encourage minors to get sex change surgeries and want to trash parental consent. Now, what does a sex change surgery have to do with abortion? Nothing. What does it have to do with reality? Nothing. Okay, fine. We're just going to do it to scare people. The fall abortion amendment would protect access to various forms of reproductive health care, but makes no mention of gender surgery. And the attorneys who wrote it say Ohio's parental consent law would not be affected. Groups opposing issue 1 have also played on voters' fears with their messaging against the 60% threshold. One spot by the Democratic political group Progress Action Fund shows a couple steamily groping in their bedroom, then interrupted by a white-haired Republican congressman who has come to take their birth control. It closes with a caption, keep Republicans out of your bedroom. Vote no on August 8th. While the ad is based in fears that the U.S. Supreme Court could limit rights to at-home contraception, and issue 1 would make it harder to enshrine those in Ohio's state constitution, the direct immediate issue is abortion, said Susan Burgess, a political science professor at Ohio University. So the claim that they, too, are going too far in their messaging, even on the pro-abortion Democratic side. The divergent abortion communications around issue 1 reflects a big problem Republicans in Ohio must confront, holding an increasingly diverse voting bloc together. Burgess said. That is a complicated coalition that includes evangelicals, it includes people on the far right, it includes libertarians, and includes, old-time Reagan Republicans, she said. They need to be able to talk about abortion to hold a certain part of their coalition together, but it's not a political winner at this time for them to stick to a hardline abortion argument. Issue 1 supporters' conversations is in more targeted settings reflect that duality. Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who supports the measure, has previously called issue 1 a win for good government that protects Ohioans from out-of-state special interests. But he had a different tone at a Seneca County dinner for Lincoln Day in May. They still do Lincoln? Wow. When he said that the August measure is 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution. Well, 100% doesn't leave much room for doubt. In an Associated Press interview, LaRose said that comment, now featured in ads around the state, was clipped from a lengthy speech and taken out of context. I don't know, man, 100%. It's hard to add more context to it than that. Aaron Baer, president of the Center for Christian Virtue, I can't believe that's a center, but okay, said on a radio show this month that his organization is only connecting issue 1 to abortion with certain segments of Ohio voters. That is, the ones they think it will work with, I suppose. All right, well, you get the idea, but this is interesting. We'll have to return to this because this is their interesting strategy of hiding the ball.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. We have another segment to get through here, and let's finish up the AP article because it is pretty interesting watching them hide the ball and watching it be documented. Well, we just tell different people different things about why we're doing this. There's one issue, one thing on the ballot. They basically cheated to get the thing to even for there to be a ballot in August. And changing the rules about how to change the rules, plus that was interesting is they're changing the rules about how to change the rules about how to change the rules, essentially, right? They had a new rule, no more August ballots because they're wasteful. Okay, well, let's change that and have one more August ballot. And what should that August question be? About changing the rules about how to change the rules. That is to say, making a 60% threshold necessary for adopting a new constitutional amendment. Change the rules about when you can have an election. Change the rules about how to determine the outcome of an election. It's pretty stark. Anyway, and of course, it is, as they say, when they're with abortion opponents and the people with whom you can score points by saying everything is about abortion, is they say, well, this is 100% about abortion. And then when you run into people who are like, well, that's actually not right, or abortion is actually something of a political loser for us. Why do we keep doing this? Oh, well, it's actually about something else. It's about fairness. You know, the fairness of making 58% of the population who vote in favor of something into losers. You know, fairness, right? Well, anyway, where were we with this? All right, we had learned about Aaron Baer and the fact that there was a Center for Christian Virtue, which feels like it should be a more diffuse sort of a thing, but apparently is centralized in a center for it. I don't know whether it is based in Ohio or not. Anyway, he says, when we go up on TV, is the ad going to be on abortion? Probably not, he told host Bob France on Always Right Radio. Well, gee whiz, what's that about? But Bear said, when talking to conservative audiences, we're hitting the life issue hard because it really exemplifies why you have to be fired up and go vote. So a little bit out of both sides of the mouth. Why not? Because of how principled and honest we are. That two-track approach is reflected in the Pro-Issue 1 campaign's first statewide ad, which debuted Monday and steers clear of abortion. Instead, it highlights that amendments to the U.S. Constitution require a 2/3 vote, while Ohio's requires a simple 50% plus one majority. Ohioans overwhelmingly voted to set the lower threshold in 1912 in a progressive-era response to rampant political corruption. Kimberly Inez McGuire, executive director of Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity, an advocacy group, says she believes Issue 1 supporters are playing down abortion in their statewide messaging because they know public opinion isn't on their side. We're seeing more and more legislators and opponents of abortion who understand that their agenda is extremely unpopular with the American people, she said. We're seeing special sessions, we're seeing anti-abortion bills passed in the dead of night, and we're seeing these denials from those who are pushing a measure that is designed to undercut democracy with the intention of hurting Ohio's abortion measure. Mark Caleb Smith, a political science professor at Southwest Ohio's Cedarville University, said abortion is emotionally charged and easy to understand and can therefore engage Ohioans to donate, volunteer, and vote when they otherwise wouldn't bother with an off-season election about something as esoteric as how to amend the state's constitution. Calling Issue 1 abortion-related also reflects the truth that its passage is pivotal to whether November's abortion ballot issue passes in Ohio, Smith said. Amendments protecting access to abortion in other states have typically passed, but with less than 60% of the vote. AP VoteCast polling last year found 59% of Ohio voters say abortion should generally be legal. Kayla Griffin, Ohio State Director of All Voting is Local Action, and an opponent of Issue 1, said her side wants to keep the messaging on Issue 1 broader than just abortion. While abortion is on the ballot right now, minimum wage is on the ballot next, she said. We are bigger, and our democracy is far bigger than a single issue, and we have to be able to navigate that when we go to the ballot box. Voting rights groups and Ohio's former Chief Justice are also at work on a constitutional amendment to change Ohio's broken redistricting system. As both supporters and opponents of Issue 1 seek voter buy-in, some of their messaging has strayed into misinformation. Ohio should vote for Issue 1 to help stop abortions up to birth, read a headline last week in lifenews.com. But the November Abortion Initiative wouldn't stop the state's lawmakers from restricting abortions after the fetus is viable outside the womb, around 23 or 24 weeks. Medical experts dispute the concept of abortions up to birth, saying that pregnancy terminations at that stage are very rare. Only 0.7% of abortions in Ohio in 2021 occurred after 21 weeks, and typically involve medication that induces birth early, which is different from a surgical abortion. The procedure, which is also referred to as an induction abortion, typically happens only if the fetus has a low probability of survival. An email from Right to Life of Greater Cincinnati went a step further, claiming, without evidence, that sex traffickers, like slavers, and abortion providers were evil twins working together to aid and abet one another, and using Jewish space lasers to do it, no doubt. Democrat Teresa Fedor, F-E-D-O-R, Fedor, I don't know, a former state lawmaker who championed Ohio's sex trafficking crackdown in the legislature, and it's a good thing to crack down on, no doubt about that, said she didn't find a prominent connection between sex trafficking and forced abortion during her 20 years working on the issue. My perspective is the anti-reproductive health care advocates are so desperate to pass Issue 1, they will, unfortunately, use a false narrative to influence their supporters, she said in an email. And I think that pretty much sums it up And in fact, that has to sum it up because that's the end of the article. But yeah, well worth reading both of them, though, I think, to get varied perspective on what's happening in Ohio, and a good time for us to refocus attention on it as August approaches. All right. Other stories are out there. One thing I need to take care of, some business leftover from yesterday. When Joan and I were pondering the weird possibility, I don't think it would actually work this way, of a government shutdown, right? If it was a generalized government shutdown, or at least one affecting the federal judiciary, which can happen. And the Republicans did, in fact, attempt and succeed in impeaching President Biden and sending the measure over to the Senate for its consideration. Of course, when a president is being impeached, constitutionally, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is required to preside over that trial. So what happens in case of a government shutdown, which would leave the federal judiciary unfunded? Would that prevent the Chief Justice from showing up to take on his constitutionally mandated role? Would the Chief Justice be interested in using that as a weapon, as a reason not to show up to an impeachment he may perhaps want nothing whatsoever to do with? I don't really know where he stands in this, but my sense is that Roberts would rather not be there for something like that. He'd rather not be there ever, really, honestly, but certainly not for a ridiculous, trumped-up charge, doomed to fail, impeachment of the president, which everybody can see is an embarrassing tit-for-tat measure, et cetera, et cetera. So he might want to lean on it. So I brought that up, that dynamic up, because normally what happens in a government shutdown situation, oh, my chair is squeaking here. All right, we'll try to move more quietly. Normally what happens in a government shutdown situation, whether it's a complete and total shutdown or a partial shutdown, whatever, is that you try to we have rules in place to avoid complete disaster by literally shutting everything down. You know, there are certain functions of government, which, I don't know, maybe libertarians don't acknowledge it, but certain functions of government that are in fact essential and have to be kept working even when there's a shutdown and there's technically no money available to pay people to do it. And they can't be forced to do it for free. That's also got constitutional problems. A little thing about slavery on that one. So what do you use? There are various measures. There's an Anti-Deficiency Act out there, which says basically that if there's a deficiency in funds to pay people to do their work, we don't shut down the essential folks because, like, for instance, if you had a government shutdown and Russia invades, do we say, well, we're just going to have to lose this war because we can't pay the army? No, we say, all right, that's essential workers, essentially. We've got some experience with that. And how it can be distorted during the COVID pandemic. But generally speaking, even in the face of a government shutdown, it's not the case that the president has to stop working. It's not the case that Congress can't work to try to fix the thing so that you're permanently stuck in shutdown. It's not the case that courts can't function and people's trials can't go forward. Generally speaking, when it comes to the courts, they say, the basic functioning of the courts is more or less exempt from this. So I have some information about that, but there's also this information. Yesterday, we were trying to decide, well, which appropriations bill would have to not get passed in order for the federal judiciary to remain unfunded. And we guessed offhand, well, is it the bill that funds the Department of Justice? That would make a certain amount of sense. The U.S. courts are an administrative department, sorta, kinda, right? But are they inside the Department of Justice? Well, you might think that's where you park them, but remember, you're trying to maintain the separation of powers and the independence of the federal judiciary from the executive, which is where the Department of Justice resides. Unless, of course, you're a big believer in the unitary executive theory, in which case not only is the executive branch unified in the person of the presidency, but apparently now they've decided this also means that there aren't even the other two branches. not only is there a unitary executive, but a unitary government that all resides in the person of the president, and there are no other branches, or at least if they exist, they're not separate or of equal power or able to check the presidency. That's the new theory that they're working with. And we spent plenty of time on that the other day, but that's going to keep coming up. But anyway, as it turns out, no, it is not the DOJ appropriations bill that covers the federal judiciary. It is a separate bill. And as I told you, they separate things up into these 12 bills in kind of funky ways. They aren't one per cabinet department or anything like that. Many of them have 2-3 different cabinet departments in it, plus sort of overarching goals that touch on many cabinet level positions in different departments and independent agencies, like the science appropriations bill, which could be, happening in almost any department. There is another one out there called the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. And that is where the federal judiciary's appropriations come from. In case you were wondering about that, here is the page for that appropriations subcommittee in the House side, chaired by Kay Granger. In case you were wondering, the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. And they have already had their full committee markup of the FY 2024 Financial Services and General Government Bill. What's in it? In case you were wondering, here's the answer. Financial Services and General Government covers, this isn't the page that actually has that, but I can bring that up. And here we are. Here's the page on their jurisdiction. They cover the Department of the Treasury, except for international affairs, technical assistance, and international financial institutions. They cover the District of Columbia. D.C. appropriations is the way we kind of used to refer to this back when I was on the Hill, but it's much more than just that. They cover the Executive Office of the President, except for the National Space Council, because science goes in the other bill. Office of Science and Technology Policy, same reason. Office of the United States Trade Representative. And the Council on Environmental Quality, which probably goes in EPA appropes. And Office of Environmental, Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of Environmental Quality. Both, apparently. Not in this. And this is convoluted stuff. But they also cover the judiciary, no exceptions there, nothing in parentheses to add, so we can all understand that. Plus, many of the independent agencies, which is an issue that came up in the new unitary executive on steroids theory that we discussed, moments ago, plus a couple of days ago. What independent agencies are they? The Administrative Conference of the United States, the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation, Consumer Product Safety Commission. By the way, the Barry Goldwater Scholarship thing, did you even know that there was a thing? That's an independent agency of the government. Election Assistance Commission, Federal Communications Commission, Federal FDIC, the FDIC Office of the Inspector General, anyway. Interesting. Federal Election Commission, Federal Labor Relations Authority, Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, Federal Trade Commission, General Services Administration, the people who cheated for Trump on the Trump hotel lease, right? The Harry S. Truman Scholarship Foundation. Apparently that's a big thing happening. Merit Systems Protection Board, the people that they can defund in order to allow Trump the unitary executive power to hire and fire everybody. Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation. National Archives and Records Administration. They sometimes become important in the news, right? National Credit Union Administration, Community Development Revolving Loan Fund, Office of Government Ethics, maybe that's important, Office of Personnel Management and related trust funds, Office of Special Counsel, hello, Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, Public Buildings Reform Board, Securities and Exchange Commission, Selective Service System, Small Business Administration, the whole damn thing is in here. United States Postal Service and payment to the Postal Service, Fund and Office of Inspector. Oh, I see. This is inappropriately bulleted here. The United States Postal Service and payment to the Postal Service Fund and Office of the Inspector General. There you go. The United States Tax Court, as separate from the rest of the judiciary, and general provisions government-wide. That's sort of vague as well. But a lot under the control of Kay Granger, so watch out for her. Who's on the subcommittee? I wonder if the member list tells us anything about how they might handle such things. The Republicans are... Oh, that's interesting. Why do they have that as... they have Representative Steve Womack of Arkansas listed here as the chair, even though... Oh, is Kay Granger the overall appropriations chair? That must be it. Okay. So Steve Womack chairs this subcommittee. Mark Amadei of Nevada, Dave Joyce of Ohio, John Molinar of Michigan, Ashley Hinson of Iowa. These are all very obscure people. Michael Cloud of Texas, Jerry Carl of Alabama, and Juan Ciscomani of Arizona. The Democrats, by the way, at least one or two more recognizable names. Steny Hoyer, actually the ranking member of this appropriations subcommittee. Matt Cartwright of Pennsylvania, Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, Sandy Bishop of Georgia, and Norma Torres of California. I know Bishop and Hoyer are slightly better than the rest. But anyway, some opportunity for mischief there, I guess. If you're talking like defunding stuff. I don't know if these are weirdo enough Republicans to actually go through with something like that. But generally speaking, appropriations committee members, not big fans of defunding anything under their control. They like to be able to control the flow of money to those things. But occasionally they will be pressured by the rest of their conference to do some unpopular work, perhaps. All right. Well, anyway, as I mentioned, there's more information I have for you from the uscourts.gov domain that tells you about how the judiciary operates in the case of a shutdown. And this was last, I guess, updated and published quite some time ago, December 22nd, 2018. That's still during the Trump administration, but it's been a while. But at least it contemplates Trump-style shutdowns and Trump-style Republican weirdness as a possibility. So here's what they tell us. It's not that long, actually. I'm sure there's a much longer and more detailed CRS report that we could pour over, but this one we'll be able to get through. Judiciary operations during a shutdown. Despite a partial shutdown of the federal government that began on December 22nd, 2018, that's why this was published, the judiciary remains open and can continue operations for approximately 3 weeks through January 11th, 2019, they said, by using court fee balances and other funds not dependent on a new appropriation. So what this tells us is that the situation in December of 2018 was that the what's it called again? The Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill had not yet then been passed. It says partial government shutdown. So sometimes a department will stay open during a partial shutdown, not because of existing law that allows you to operate as essential workers, but because your appropriations bill has been passed. Had they passed the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill, but not the Department of Justice's Appropriations Bill, then DOJ would be, partly anyway, shut down. But the federal judiciary, under the Financial Services and General Government Bill, would be open and operating. If you've passed your appropriations bill and it's been signed into law, you're not part of the government that gets shut down. All right. And where is the rest of the justice operation? Of course, remember that is lumped in with the Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, and then science and related agencies. That's, and by the way, have you ever seen the list of the 12 different subcommittees and their bills? It's not that important to interrupt things with, but you should take a look at the Appropriations Committee page and look at the list of the subcommittees in order to get that. The only one that stands alone is, I think, Defense, Their defense, the Homeland Security stands alone. The legislative branch stands alone as well. Everybody else has some sort of mix and hodgepodge going on. Anyway, so what happens in the case of a shutdown, either total or partial government shutdown, in which the financial, what the hell's the name again? Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill has not been passed. And so therefore, you might worry about the shutdown of the federal judiciary. Well, they said that at least at that point, and I'm sure it would be something similar, at least for a shorter period of time, the federal judiciary is entitled to rely on court fee balances. That is, things that fees and I guess fines that have been paid to U.S. courts by people, filing cases, or in some cases, I guess, losing cases and being fined by the courts. But any money is paid to the U.S. court, either as a part of the process of filing a case or having lost a case, goes into their coffers, and they can use that money in the absence of appropriated funds from Congress to operate so long as they hold out. And in this case, they thought, well, it would only last about 3 weeks, but that might give Congress the opportunity to remedy the problem and pass the remaining appropriations bills, or at least the financial services appropriations bill, such that the court could operate. Now, it goes on to say that most proceedings and deadlines that were then pending will occur as scheduled. In cases where an attorney from an executive branch agency is not working because of the shutdown, like let's say they haven't passed the Commerce Justice Appropriations Bill, and so the DOJ's lawyer that's going to be handling the case for the government is working for a department that's been shut down, where that's the case, hearing and filing dates may be rescheduled. So the court will just say, well, we'll just delay things until that attorney is back on the clock. The case management and electronic case files system will also remain in operation for electronic filing of documents. If the shutdown were to continue past 3 weeks and exhaust the federal judiciary's resources, the courts, it says, would then operate under the terms of the Anti-Deficiency Act. So it doesn't even matter when they run out of money. It's just, well, we'll draw this pool until we run out of money, and then after that, we rely on the Anti-Deficiency Act, which allows work to continue during a lapse in appropriations if it is necessary to support the exercise of Article 3 judicial powers. Under this scenario, each court and federal defender's office would determine the staffing resources necessary to support such work. So, in other words, it's a determination that would be made by the judiciary on who's essential and who's not. And the essential workers could continue to work, and their work would be covered under the Anti-Deficiency Act. You can look that one up. We might even give you the Wikipedia link on something like that. But that's the thing that basically says, well, yeah, some of the functions of government are just too important to have them fall by the wayside due to Congress's ineptness in passing appropriations. And we also don't want them to be punished by or reachable by the legislative branch. There's balances of power here to be maintained. Yes, they have the power of the purse, but we can't allow a petulant Congress to just say all of the government functions that are necessary to keep things moving, whether it's defense or the courts or what have you. These essential functions can't be shut down by this bunch of clowns. We have to at least keep the basics running. That's where the balance comes in. Anyway, so you can read more about the Anti-Deficiency Act if you like, if that's the sort of thing you want to spend your time on. But anyway, it would come down to the judiciary deciding who would be able to operate and be able to depend on getting paid via the Anti-Deficiency Act. I can't imagine that the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court would leave that decision in anybody else's hands. Who else is higher ranking when it comes to deciding whether or not the Chief Justice himself is essential enough to be covered by the Anti-Deficiency Act for the purposes of showing up to preside over a ridiculous show trial for a ridiculously and improperly impeached President Joe Biden. In this case, if presuming that they're not hiding any fantastical evidence, even though they keep saying that that's exactly what they've got. So, if, in other words, the Chief Justice didn't want anything to do with it, he could determine, and who would gainsay him on this, right? Who would be in a position to deny him this or to review his decision? Nobody. He could decide that, while it's important and essential that I keep working as Chief Justice here at the Supreme Court and keep our docket moving, the question of whether or not I should interrupt all of that and show up for this stupid show trial that's doomed to failure in the Senate is something completely different. And I say that's not essential, but my work here at the court is essential. Is that something he could decide? Yes, apparently that power probably resides in his hands, and I don't know who you would think you could appeal that to. I mean, the separation of powers there, if that's a concept that still exists, would likely protect that decision, right? Which is also probably a good reason to suppose that, no, I don't think the Supreme Court in any configuration would be particularly interested in upholding that weird executive theory, the unitary executive on steroids theory that says that the other branches are not, in fact, equal and do not, in fact, have the right to check the presidency. Why would they give that power up? Now, it may be that they decide, no, your theory isn't valid, but the executive says, well, how many guns have you got? In which case, you've reached the end of democracy. Just one of many existing paths to the end of democracy out there. But the idea that even a super ultra conservative Supreme Court would say we want to write ourselves out of the important position that we occupy is pretty difficult to imagine. But with a gun to their head, I guess it would be possible to imagine. So there's the answer. Just wanted to follow up and go back to that. Many more important stories. Of course, we've got 2 more days this week to cover all the things that all of you have been sending me, and it's my intention to turn around and do that. But in the meantime, if you're anxious to hear more about it, Justice Putnam brings you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.
NetRootsRadio.com.
And that's where it's going to be, NetRootsRadio.com.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And here's what he's got on tap. This time, he says, Trump might not do the news media the favor of announcing when he is indicted. Let's see why that's not the case. Then, a Kansas judge ruled that the police practice of detaining motorists on I-70 with license plates from states with legal pot is unconstitutional. Wow, a war on motorists, they call it.